The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office as Elena Martinez stood before the mahogany desk, her wet shoes squeaking against the marble floor. She clutched her resignation letter so tightly that the paper had begun to crumple at the edges. Across from her sat Adrian Blackwood, the billionaire CEO whose company she'd worked for as a financial analyst for the past 3 years. His steel-gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded, her throat tight. "My mother's medical bills have become unmanageable. I found a position in Chicago that pays significantly more. I start in 2 weeks." Adrian leaned back in his leather chair, his jaw tight. At 35, he was known throughout Manhattan as the man who'd built an empire from nothing after his parents died, leaving him with nothing but debts and a small failing business. He transformed that struggling company into a multinational corporation worth billions. But he was also known for something else, his complete emotional detachment. In the 3 years Elena had worked for him, she'd never seen him smile. Not once. "There's another option," Adrian said, his voice low and measured. "Marry me." Elena's resignation letter slipped from her fingers and floated to the floor. "Excuse me?" Adrian stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The city lights reflected in the glass, casting shadows across his sharp features. "My grandfather's will stipulates that I must be married by my 36th birthday to retain control of the company. That's in 3 months. The board is already circling like vultures, waiting for me to fail this one requirement so they can push me out and install their own puppet CEO." "This is insane," Elena whispered, but even as she said it, her mind was calculating. Her mother needed surgery that insurance wouldn't cover. The experimental treatment cost $300,000. She was drowning in debt, working 2 jobs on top of her analyst position, and still falling further behind every month. Adrian turned to face her. "I'll pay off all your mother's medical bills. Every single one. You'll receive a salary of $200,000 for the duration of our arrangement. After 1 year, we'll divorce quietly. You'll receive a settlement of $2 million and be free to live your life however you choose." Elena's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her temples. "Why me?" "You could marry anyone. There are 1,000 women who would." "I don't trust easily," Adrian interrupted. "In 3 years, you've never once tried to manipulate me, flatter me, or angle for something more than your job. You're honest. You work harder than anyone else in this building. And you need what I'm offering as much as I need what you can provide." "A marriage license," Elena said flatly. "A solution to both our problems." Adrian pulled a folder from his desk drawer and set it before her. "My lawyers have drafted a contract. Read it. Think about it. But I need an answer by tomorrow morning." Elena's hands trembled as she picked up the folder. Inside were page after page of legal language, but the key points stood out clearly: a marriage of convenience, separate bedrooms, minimal public appearances together, and a clean divorce after 12 months. It was a business transaction, nothing more. No emotions. No complications. She thought of her mother's pale face in the hospital bed last week, the way she tried to smile through the pain and tell Elena not to worry. She thought of the stack of bills on her kitchen counter, the ones she'd stopped opening because seeing the numbers only made the panic worse. She thought of her own dreams, graduate school, maybe travel, things that had seemed impossible under the weight of medical debt. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian nodded once. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. As Elena walked out of his office into the storm, she knew her answer would be yes. How could it be anything else? But as the rain soaked through her coat, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into something far more complicated than a simple business arrangement. She'd seen something in Adrian's eyes when he'd made his offer, something haunted and hollow, like a man who'd locked away a piece of himself so long ago that he'd forgotten it existed. She had no idea that in accepting his proposal, she would become the key to unlocking it. Elena signed the contract at 8:55 the next morning, her signature barely recognizable through her shaking hand. Within 48 hours, her mother's hospital bills were paid in full. Within a week, she stood in City Hall wearing a simple cream dress she'd bought on her lunch break, watching Adrian slip a platinum band onto her finger with all the emotion of someone signing a business memo. The entire ceremony lasted 12 minutes. Their first night as a married couple was spent in Adrian's sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Elena had seen luxury before, but this was different. The space felt more like a museum than a home, everything perfectly placed, nothing personal, no photographs or mementos that suggested anyone actually lived there. Adrian showed her to the guest wing, a suite larger than her entire previous apartment, complete with a bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area. "You'll have complete privacy here," he said, standing in the doorway as if afraid to enter. "Mrs. Chen comes 3 times a week to clean and stock the kitchen. She's been with me for 10 years. She knows this is an arrangement and will be discreet." "Thank you," Elena said, feeling suddenly exhausted by the surreal nature of her new reality. Adrian nodded curtly. "I'm usually at the office by 6. I return around 9. We'll need to attend 3 charity events together this month to maintain appearances. I'll have my assistant send you the details." He paused, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face, uncertainty, perhaps, or regret. "If you need anything, let me know." Then he was gone, and Elena was alone in her gilded cage. The first month was strange beyond words. She and Adrian existed in the same space like ghosts passing through walls. They'd see each other occasionally in the kitchen. He drank his coffee black at 5:30 every morning before his workout, or in the living room when their schedules accidentally aligned. Their conversations were polite, brief, and painfully formal. Mrs. Chen watched them both with worried eyes but said nothing. The charity events were worse. Elena would put on one of the designer dresses Adrian's assistant had provided, and Adrian would appear in a tuxedo looking devastating and distant. He'd place his hand on the small of her back as they entered ballrooms filled with Manhattan's elite, and she'd feel the warmth of his palm through the fabric of her dress and wonder how someone could touch her so carefully yet feel so far away. They'd smile for photographers, make small talk with board members and investors, and play the part of the devoted newlyweds. Then they'd return home and retreat to their separate wings without a word. But Elena noticed things. She noticed that Adrian never slept more than 4 hours a night. She'd hear him moving through the apartment at 2 or 3 in the morning, his footsteps restless. She noticed that he kept a photograph face down in his study, and though she never touched it, she wondered about it constantly. She noticed the tightness around his eyes when someone at a charity gala asked about children, the way his jaw would clench and he'd steer the conversation elsewhere with practiced ease. 2 months into their arrangement, Elena's mother called her, crying with joy. The surgery had been successful. The experimental treatment was working. She was going to live. Elena hung up the phone and wept alone in her beautiful room, grateful and heartbroken all at once because she had no one to share this moment with. Her marriage was a contract. Her husband was a stranger. That night, she found Adrian in his study, working despite the late hour. She knocked softly on the open door. "My mother's treatment worked," she said simply. "I wanted you to know. What you did, what you gave me back my mother. Thank you." Adrian looked up from his laptop, and for the first time since she'd known him, his expression wasn't carefully controlled. He looked exhausted and raw. "I'm glad," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to lose a parent. If I could prevent that for someone else, even once, then maybe." He stopped abruptly and looked away. Elena stepped into the study. "What happened to you, Adrian? What made you lock yourself away like this?" His shoulders tensed. "That's not part of our arrangement." "I know. But maybe it should be. We're living like prisoners in this apartment, both of us avoiding each other. We have 10 more months of this. Don't you think it would be easier if we were at least friends?" "I don't have friends," Adrian said. "You have employees and business associates. That's not the same thing." Adrian closed his laptop slowly. When he looked at her again, there was something different in his eyes, a crack in the armor, small but significant. "I had a fiancée. 7 years ago. Her name was Sarah. We were supposed to get married, start a family. I thought I had everything figured out." Elena's breath caught. "What happened?" "She died." The words were simple, brutal. "Car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. I was supposed to be in the car with her that night, but I'd stayed late at the office working on a deal. Always working. I chose work over dinner with her, and she died alone." The pain in his voice was so raw that Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "Adrian, that wasn't your fault. Wasn't it?" He stood abruptly and walked to the window. "After she died, I threw myself into building the company. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I stopped feeling anything. It was easier that way. And somewhere along the line, I forgot how to be anything other than this, a machine that makes money and closes deals." Elena walked over to stand beside him. "You're not a machine. You saved my mother's life. You gave me hope when I had none left. That's not nothing." Adrian finally looked at her, really looked at her, and Elena saw the man beneath the ice, broken, lonely, and afraid. I offered you a marriage of convenience because I needed a solution to a problem. But standing here now, I think maybe I needed something else too. I just didn't know it. What's that? A reason to remember I'm still human. Everything changed after that night in the study. The transformation wasn't sudden or dramatic, it was subtle, like ice melting 1 degree at a time. Adrian started coming home earlier, sometimes by 7 instead of 9. He'd find Elena reading in the living room and would sit in the chair across from her, not saying much at first, just existing in the same space. They began having dinner together twice a week, then 3 times, then every night. They talked about everything except what was happening between them. Books, politics, Elena's secret dream of opening her own financial consulting firm someday, Adrian's memories of his parents before they died. My father used to take me to Yankee Stadium every summer, Adrian said one evening over pasta that Mrs. Chen had prepared. Just the 2 of us. He'd buy peanuts and we'd sit in the cheap seats, and for those few hours, we weren't struggling. We were just a dad and his kid watching baseball. Elena smiled. What position did you play in Little League? Shortstop. Terribly. Adrian's lips quirked, not quite a smile, but close. I was better at calculating batting averages than actually hitting the ball. Some things never change, Elena teased, and was rewarded with something she'd never seen before. Adrian Blackwood laughed. It was brief and rusty, as if his laugh had forgotten how to work properly, but it was real. That night, Elena lay in bed unable to sleep, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. This wasn't part of the plan. The contract had been clear. Business arrangement, clean divorce, no complications. But her feelings weren't reading the fine print. She was falling for her husband, her temporary, contractual husband who'd made it crystal clear that love wasn't part of the deal. Meanwhile, Adrian was fighting his own battle. He found himself looking for Elena when he came home, disappointed when she was visiting her mother or out with friends. He caught himself buying her favorite tea at the specialty shop near his office. He noticed everything about her. The way she twisted her hair when she was thinking, the small scar on her wrist from a childhood accident, the fact that she always sang quietly when she cooked, usually off-key. He'd catch himself watching her read, mesmerized by the expressions that crossed her face as she turned each page. 4 months into their marriage, Adrian's grandfather's former business partner threw a gala celebrating 50 years in business. Attendance was mandatory for board members and major stakeholders. Elena wore an emerald green gown that made her dark eyes luminous. When Adrian saw her descending the penthouse stairs, his breath caught audibly. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it with an intensity that scared him. The gala was held at the Plaza Hotel. They danced for the cameras, Adrian's hand at Elena's waist, their bodies closer than they'd ever been. The ballroom was full of people, but Adrian was acutely aware of only one, the woman in his arms who smelled like jasmine and felt like coming home. "Everyone's watching us," Elena murmured. "Let them," Adrian replied, surprising himself. "For once, I don't care what they think." Elena looked up at him, and something passed between them, recognition, hunger, possibility. Adrian's hand tightened on her waist. He wanted to kiss her so badly it was almost painful, wanted to forget the contract and the arrangement and all the careful walls he'd built around his heart. But then Richard Carmichael, the board member who'd been most vocal about forcing Adrian out, appeared beside them with a predatory smile. "Adrian, Elena. What a lovely couple you make. One would almost believe this marriage is real." Elena stiffened, but Adrian kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean, Richard." "Oh, come now. Everyone knows this is just your way around your grandfather's ridiculous marriage clause. A hired wife to keep your position. Very clever." Richard's eyes were cold. "But I wonder, will she still be around once the year is up and you've got what you need?" Adrian felt Elena try to pull away, but he held her closer. "Elena is my wife. Whatever else you think you know is irrelevant." "We'll see," Richard said. "There's a board meeting next month. Some of us think it's time for new leadership regardless of your marital status. You've become too powerful, Adrian. Too controlling. Your grandfather never intended for one person to have absolute authority." After Richard walked away, Elena and Adrian stood in silence. The moment between them had shattered. The reminder of why they were really together hung in the air like smoke. "We should go," Elena said quietly. They rode home in silence, the partition between them feeling like a chasm. Back at the penthouse, Elena headed straight for her wing, but Adrian caught her hand. "Elena, wait." She turned, and he saw tears in her eyes. "What Richard said. He's a snake trying to get in your head. Ignore him." But he's right, isn't it? In 8 months, this ends. I go back to my life, you go back to yours, and we pretend none of this happened. Her voice cracked. That's the deal. Adrian stepped closer, still holding her hand. What if I don't want that deal anymore? Elena's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between the contract signing and tonight, this stopped being an arrangement for me. I look forward to coming home because you're here. I think about you constantly. I want to know what you're thinking, what makes you laugh, what you dream about. He raised his free hand to cup her face. I'm saying I'm falling in love with my wife, and I don't know what to do about it. Elena's tears spilled over. Adrian. You don't have to say anything. I know this isn't what you signed up for. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest, just once. Elena laughed through her tears. You idiot. I've been falling for you for months. I've been terrified because I thought I was alone in this, that you still saw me as just an employee playing a part. Adrian's heart felt like it might explode. You're not alone. What do we do now? I don't know, Adrian admitted. But I know I don't want to waste another night sleeping in separate rooms, pretending I don't want to be near you. Elena's smile was tremulous and beautiful. Then don't. When Adrian kissed her, it felt like something broken inside him finally starting to heal. The next few weeks existed in a bubble of fragile happiness. Adrian and Elena stopped pretending. They shared meals, shared space, and eventually shared a bed, though they took things slowly, both aware of how precious and precarious this new development was. Adrian found himself smiling, actually smiling, and his employees noticed. Elena glowed. Even Mrs. Chen commented on how different the apartment felt, how it had finally become a home. But outside their bubble, storm clouds were gathering. Richard Carmichael and 3 other board members had been quietly building a case against Adrian. They'd dug into every business decision he'd made over the past 5 years, looking for anything they could use against him. They'd hired investigators to look into his marriage to Elena, certain they could prove it was fraudulent. And they'd been courting shareholders, promising dividends and corporate restructuring if they could remove Adrian from power. The board meeting was scheduled for the first week of the 6th month of Adrian and Elena's marriage. Adrian had been preparing his defense for weeks, working with his lawyers to ensure every aspect of his leadership could withstand scrutiny. But the night before the meeting, Richard played his trump card. Adrian's phone rang at 11 p.m. It was his head of legal, Marcus Chen. We have a problem, Marcus said without preamble. Richard's team has a witness, a former employee from Elena's previous job who's willing to testify that Elena told her about the marriage arrangement before it happened. She claims Elena described it as a business deal, and said she was being paid to play a role. Adrian felt ice flood his veins. Who's the witness? Diane Foster. She worked with Elena at her previous firm. Apparently they had a falling out over a promotion. She's bitter and willing to say whatever Richard wants her to say. Adrian paced his study, his mind racing. Can we discredit her? Possibly. But it'll be messy. And even if we prove she's lying, the seed of doubt will be planted. The board will question the legitimacy of your marriage, which gives them grounds to argue you haven't met your grandfather's conditions. They're going to try to force you out tomorrow, Adrian. After hanging up, Adrian sat in the darkness of his study. He could fight this. He had resources, lawyers, power. But fighting meant dragging Elena into a public battle that could destroy her reputation. It meant exposing their private life to scrutiny and judgment. It meant potentially losing everything anyway if the board decided his marriage was fraudulent. There was another option. He could step down voluntarily. Sell his shares, take the money, and walk away. He'd still be wealthy beyond measure. He and Elena could build a life together without the burden of the company. They could be free. But the company was his father's legacy. His grandfather's legacy. Stepping down meant letting men like Richard win. It meant abandoning the thousands of employees who depended on the company for their livelihoods. It meant giving up the thing he'd spent 15 years building. Adrian? Elena's voice came from the doorway. She wore one of his shirts as a nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. It's late. Come to bed. He looked at her, this woman who'd become his entire world in 6 months, and felt something crack open in his chest. They're going to attack you tomorrow. Richard has a witness who's going to claim our marriage is fake. Elena went pale but walked into the room and sat beside him. Is the witness telling the truth? Technically, yes. When we started, it was an arrangement. But it's not anymore. We both know that. Then we tell them that. We tell them the truth, that we got married for practical reasons but fell in love. People will understand. Adrian shook his head. The board won't care about the truth. They want me gone. They'll twist anything we say. This will get ugly, Elena. Your name will be dragged through the media. People will call you a gold digger, an opportunist. They'll question every moment we've had together. So what? Elena's voice was fierce. Let them talk. I know what we have is real. You know it. That's all that matters. Is it? Adrian stood and walked to the window. Or am I being selfish again? I chose work over Sarah, and she died. Now I'm choosing pride over you. Maybe I should just walk away from the company. We could start over somewhere else. I could consult, invest. Would be fine financially. Elena stood and grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. I didn't fall in love with a man who runs away from fights. I fell in love with a man who builds empires from nothing. That company is part of who you are, Adrian. Your parents would want you to fight for it. Your grandfather would want you to fight for it. And I want you to fight for it. Even if fighting means losing you. You won't lose me. Elena's eyes blazed. I'm not going anywhere. But you will lose yourself if you give up something that matters this much because you're afraid. I won't let you do that. Not for me. Not for anyone. Adrian pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. How did I get so lucky? You married me for convenience, remember? Elena's laugh was shaky. Best business decision you ever made. The next morning, they entered the boardroom together. 20 faces looked up from the long conference table, some friendly, most neutral, for openly hostile. Richard Carmichael sat at the far end, his expression smug. The meeting began with financial reports and quarterly projections. Adrian presented his numbers with his usual precision, showing consistent growth and innovation across all divisions. Then Richard stood. Before we move to new business, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Adrian's marriage to Elena Martinez was a clear attempt to circumvent the conditions of his grandfather's will. We have evidence that this marriage is fraudulent. Richard nodded to his assistant, who distributed folders to every board member. Inside were photos, timeline analyses, and a signed affidavit from Diane Foster claiming Elena had described the marriage as purely financial. What you're looking at, Richard continued, is proof that Adrian Blackwood has been deceiving this board and violating the spirit of his grandfather's wishes. A marriage of convenience is not a real marriage. Therefore, he has not met the conditions necessary to maintain his position as CEO. I move that we remove Adrian Blackwood from his position effective immediately. The room erupted into arguments. Some board members defended Adrian. Others called for his resignation. Through it all, Adrian sat perfectly still, his hand finding Elena's under the table. Then Elena stood. The room fell silent. You're right, she said clearly. Our marriage did start as an arrangement. Adrian needed a wife. I needed help with my mother's medical bills. It was transactional. Business. I won't lie about that. Richard's smile was triumphant. But Elena wasn't finished. But here's what you don't understand about real life, Richard. It's messy. It's complicated. People's feelings change. Adrian and I didn't plan to fall in love. We didn't sit down and decide it would make good business sense. It just happened, slowly, quietly, unexpectedly. And now, standing here in front of all of you, I can say with absolute certainty that I love my husband. Not because he's wealthy. Not because he saved my mother. But because he's kind, brilliant, driven, and more alone than anyone I've ever met. He built walls around himself to survive grief, and I'm honored that he let me help tear them down. Elena looked directly at Richard. So yes, our marriage started as convenience. But it became real. It became love. And if that's not what Adrian's grandfather wanted, a grandson who learned to open his heart again, then I don't know what is. She sat down, her heart pounding. Adrian's hand squeezed hers under the table. The vote was called. When the hands went up, it was 12-8 in favor of keeping Adrian as CEO. Richard and his faction had lost. As they left the boardroom, Adrian pulled Elena into an empty conference room and kissed her breathless. You were extraordinary. I just told the truth, Elena said. Your grandfather's will didn't say you had to start out in love. It just said you had to be married. We met that condition. Everything else is just icing. Adrian laughed and pulled her close. I love you, Elena Blackwood. I really, really love you. I love you too. But next time you need to make a major business decision, maybe consult your wife first. Deal. Speaking of which. Adrian pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not the platinum band from their courthouse wedding, but a vintage emerald surrounded by diamonds. I found this in my grandmother's things. She wore it for 50 years. I thought maybe you'd like to wear it now. As a symbol of something real. Elena's eyes filled with tears as Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger beside the platinum band. It's perfect. So are you. 6 months later, Elena woke to find Adrian's side of the bed empty. She stretched and smiled, listening to the sounds of him in the kitchen. In the years since their marriage had begun, so much had changed. The contract had been formally dissolved 3 months ago. Both of them had agreed it was ridiculous to have a legal document dictating the terms of their actual marriage. Elena had launched her consulting firm with Adrian's support, and it was already thriving. Adrian had implemented sweeping changes at the company, bringing in younger voices and modernizing their approach. Richard Carmichael had quietly resigned from the board after several of his questionable business dealings came to light. But the biggest change was in Adrian himself. The cold, distant man who'd proposed a marriage of convenience no longer existed. He laughed now. He took days off. He and Elena traveled, Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona, making memories in cities where no one cared about board meetings or contracts. He'd started seeing a therapist to work through his grief over Sarah's death, finally giving himself permission to heal. He talked about the future now, about possibilities and dreams. Elena found him in the kitchen making breakfast, or attempting to. He'd burned the eggs and the toast was smoking slightly. I'm rescinding your kitchen privileges, Elena said, laughing as she took the spatula from his hand. You run a billion-dollar company but can't make scrambled eggs. I'm delegating this task to someone more qualified, Adrian said, kissing her neck. I hired you as my wife. Surely breakfast falls under your job description. There is no job description anymore, remember? We tore up the contract. Then I'm asking as your husband who loves you and wants to make you breakfast but is apparently incompetent. Elena laughed and started fresh eggs while Adrian handled the toast, with supervision. They ate on the terrace overlooking the park, the summer morning warm and promising. I have something to tell you, Elena said, suddenly nervous. I went to the doctor yesterday. Adrian's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Are you okay? Is something wrong? No. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. Elena took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Adrian's face transformed, joy, wonder, and terror all at once. Pregnant. We're having a baby. We are. I know we haven't really talked about it, and I know you had plans with Sarah that never. Adrian moved around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands. Elena. Look at me. This is not a replacement for what I lost. This is something entirely new. You are not Sarah. Our baby is not a second chance at a life I should have had. This is our life. Ours. And I want it more than I've ever wanted anything. Elena's tears spilled over. You're sure? Because this is real now. This is forever. I've been sure since the night you stood in my study and asked me what happened to make me lock myself away. You didn't have to care. It wasn't in the contract. But you cared anyway. You saw me, really saw me, and you didn't run away. Adrian placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. I thought I'd lost the ability to hope for things like this. A family. A future. But you gave that back to me. You gave me back myself. They held each other as the morning sun climbed higher, 2 people who'd started as strangers in a business arrangement and found something neither had been looking for, a real partnership, a true love, a genuine home. 3 months later, Adrian stood in the same hospital where Elena's mother had received her treatment. He paced the waiting room until Marcus Chen, his head of legal and now close friend, put a hand on his shoulder. She's going to be fine, Marcus said. Women have been doing this for millennia. That's not comforting, Adrian muttered. Then his name was called and he was running down the hallway to the delivery room where Elena was waiting. 12 hours later, he held his daughter for the first time. She was impossibly small, with dark hair like her mother and eyes that would eventually settle into some unknown color. She gripped his finger with her tiny hand, and Adrian felt something fundamental shift inside him, the last piece of armor falling away, leaving him completely vulnerable and utterly unafraid. What should we name her? Elena asked, exhausted but radiant. Adrian thought of his mother, who died when he was 12. Grace. After my mom. Grace Elena Blackwood. It's perfect. They brought Grace home to the penthouse that Elena had slowly transformed into a real home. The walls now held photographs, Elena and Adrian on their travels, candid shots of them laughing, professional portraits from their real wedding 6 months ago when they'd exchanged vows in front of family and friends. The nursery was painted soft yellow, filled with books and toys and all the hope parents pour into a room for their child. On Grace's first night home, Adrian stood beside her crib watching her sleep. Elena came to stand beside him, and he wrapped his arm around her. "I keep thinking about the day you came into my office to resign," Adrian said quietly. "If you'd left, if I hadn't been desperate enough to propose something crazy, none of this would exist. I'd still be alone. Still empty. But I didn't leave. And you were brave enough to propose something unconventional. And here we are." "Here we are," Adrian echoed. "You know, the contract specified 12 months. We're well past that now. You're free to leave any time you want." Elena elbowed him gently. "Idiot. I'm not going anywhere." "Good. Because I fully intend to be inconvenient for the rest of your life." "I'm counting on it." They stood together in the soft glow of the nightlight, watching their daughter sleep, two people who'd found each other in the most unexpected way and built something real from what had started as pretense. The marriage of convenience had become a marriage of love, of partnership, of absolute trust. Adrian had offered Elena a solution to her problems, a way out of debt and desperation. But she had given him something far more valuable. She'd given him back his ability to feel, to love, to hope. She'd given him back the part of himself he'd locked away the night Sarah died, the part that believed in futures and families and forevers. Years later, when Grace was old enough to ask how her parents met, they'd tell her the truth, that they'd started as a business arrangement, a practical solution to separate problems. They'd tell her that sometimes love doesn't begin with fireworks and romance, but with honesty and trust and two people brave enough to be vulnerable. They'd tell her that the best partnerships often start in unexpected ways, and that real love is something you build together, day by day, choice by choice. But mostly, they'd tell her that sometimes the most convenient arrangement turns out to be the best decision you ever made, not because it was easy, but because it led you exactly where you needed to be. As Grace grew older, the penthouse filled with noise and life and joy. Adrian learned to make breakfast, eventually, and Elena's consulting firm expanded to 3 offices across the country. They fought sometimes, about small things and occasionally about big things, but they always came back to each other. They made decisions together. They built a life together. And every year on the anniversary of that rainy night when Elena had stood in Adrian's office with her resignation letter, they'd order takeout, sit on the terrace, and toast to the most ridiculous proposal either of them had ever heard. "To marriage of convenience," Elena would say. "To the woman who made it inconveniently real," Adrian would reply. Then they'd laugh, because they both knew the truth. There had been nothing convenient about falling in love. It had been messy and scary and complicated and absolutely worth it. They'd both entered that arrangement thinking they needed a solution to a problem. What they'd found instead was a partner for life, someone who saw them completely and loved them anyway. Adrian Blackwood had offered Elena Martinez a marriage of convenience to save his company and solve her financial crisis. But Elena had given him something he'd thought he'd lost forever the night Sarah died, the courage to love again, to hope again, to believe that happiness was possible. She'd given him back his heart. And in return, he'd given her his, completely and forever. The contract might have ended, but their marriage, their real, messy, beautiful marriage, was just beginning. And unlike anything else in Adrian's carefully controlled life, he had no idea where it would lead. But with Elena by his side and Grace sleeping peacefully down the hall, he couldn't wait to find out. Some business arrangements, it turned out, were meant to last a lifetime.